Hello, Nicola. Thank you for
Hi,
being our guest today on the Break Even podcast.
thank you very much for having me.
So, you were affected by problem gambling, but you weren't the gambler yourself. Can you tell me a bit more about this, please?
Yeah, so my kind of first understanding in around gambling harms or gambling addiction um, came around the back end of 2017 when I came across or was a text message from a payday loan company on a mobile phone, and it was regarding a payment that was due out of the family bank account, um, and this payment was going to be taken in the next couple of days. And the reason it struck me is because it was most of the account number was struck out except for the last three digits. And on having a conversation with my husband at the time and saying, what's this? Like, we don't have payday loans, we don't have extended credit. He said, "Oh, ignore that. It's spam." And I always say I don't know what made me check to this day. Call it gut instinct, something just not
Yeah.
feeling quite right. And rather than I, I went and hid myself to log into our online banking because I just
Yeah.
didn't sort of
Yeah.
feel like it added up. And it was only on having to re-register for my own online banking account, which was then obviously setting off even
Yeah.
more alarms, that I felt, well, what's this? And when I finally got into the account, it was just transaction after transaction after transaction of gambling, various operators or bets. Now, it was a very tight period because it was obviously a crisis end of the gambling harms where that loss of control had happened, that it would just consumed and taken over anything. If I'd have probably looked at those accounts 2 years, 3 years before, that wouldn't have been there. It
Yeah.
didn't exist. So I immediately, and I don't know why, asked the question, do you have an issue with gambling? I might have even said, do you have a gambling addiction? And as the
Yeah.
words came out of my mouth, thinking, I don't even know if that's something that even
Yeah.
exists, Um, and it was at that point he was really unable to, for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. And
That's a
it was,
really poignant point you just made there, isn't it? Because I guess a lot of people that are affected by someone else's gambling don't even know that gambling is an addiction, that you can get harmed from gambling. So it's amazing how many people probably feel like that. Nicola, did you suspect anything before you found out, or was it a total shot bolt?
the level of gambling that existed and the extremes and the harms that existed, I absolutely had no awareness of whatsoever. Was I aware that my husband was involved in gambling activity? Yes. And, much like as we see across popular culture now and we see across the landscape in general
Yeah.
about, the nation of gamblers, um, regular football accumulators
Yeah.
amongst friends, amongst a peer group. He served in the armed forces and had done a number of operations across the time of the period of our relationship. And I knew that was quite a lot of poker that went down
Yeah.
on sites. Again, the environment that they were in. Soldiers spending times in casinos
Yeah.
on R&R because they used to feed and give you drink
Yeah.
after, this is probably pre
Yeah.
late bar licensing.
Yeah.
So that was where you could go
Sure.
into the early hours. So that was all something I was aware
Yeah.
he was involved in, but no.
So you had no reason to think that, or even know anything about gambling harms, because as you say, most people gamble, most people, whatever they do harm wise, they keep hidden, as you now know. How do you think at the time it affected you and specifically your relationship?
Yeah. So at the first instant, and when I realised the level of the situation one we were in as a family, it was kind of calling in all the recruits. So that's both families on both sides. you're immediately looking at things like the finances, which was where I kind of started, because there was a massive web to like feed through. But then ultimately I was aware how suddenly this person that I'd known for the best part of 15 years and had grown up with, not only as a as a partner, but a friend and a trust, like one of the most trusted people in my life, is that your first thing is you want to help them, because you can see, I could see straight away that there was a complete overnight change in presentation. So what I was maybe a little bit naive around was that help would just be accepted, and that was, it was a given that he was there and at the same place that I expected him to be, and would be wanting to work on everything and anything between, particularly around our relationship. And that's kind of been my...
It was a lovely attitude to have had, wasn't it? Because I guess, and I'm sure you've learned from your experience of what you do now, is that a lot of people in your position would have been angry and bitter, but you were saying even at the time you realised that he needed some help and you wanted to help him.
Yeah, the first place I went to, as I say, was the bank in terms of some of the practicalities, but the other place I went to myself was the GP, because I knew he wouldn't go, but I walked into the GP surgery and said, my husband has a gambling addiction. I have absolutely no idea where to, like, what do I do? What do we do? She, by sheer twist of fate, had someone in the surgery only, I think it was a week before, that had set up the Preston Gamblers Anonymous, and had been having some chat with her around his own gambling addiction. So she referred me to him, just by a sheer twist of fate. But the other thing she tried to offer me was antidepressants, because obviously my mental health and my emotional well-being was so low by that point, because, as I say, it was just this...
So in one way you were really fortunate and lucky that, first of all, they knew somebody in your area that there was a Gamblers Anonymous group, and secondly, you went to see a GP that actually recognised that gambling harms for people that are affected by it has its tolls, and she recognised that instantly.
Yeah. And as I say, that is something, as I've worked in the space, that is very, very rare across, or very inconsistent area to area. So it was almost like a bit of a twist of fate how things unfolded for me in that regard, because then I started attending the local Gamanon, even though I didn't have somebody in the other room. And I was going because I needed to... I don't know, curiosity, or just to support not only myself, but feel like I was doing what I could, because I was determined to save the relationship. I think there was two different things going on for me at that time. I had a family. I had two small children. I'd invested the biggest time of my adult existence in this one person, and I didn't see in any way that this was going to be the thing that tore us apart to the degree it did. But I'd be lying to say if that's not exactly what it did.
It certainly sounds like it wasn't for lack of trying on your end. Tell me a bit more about the Gamanon experience as well.
Yeah, so mine was a bit of a peculiar experience in that sense, because we had kind of core group of what we call in the space affected others, and that was everything from partners, children, and parents. But the actual core group was led by somebody who was in recovery from their own gambling.
Oh, right.
So, and my naivety around kind of GA and Gamanon or any kind of support group in that sense was just, that's how it was. Now, what that gave me very early doors was a bit of an insight from the gambler perspective, which I really look back and value now, because I really think that changed the direction of my approach and my communication moving forwards, because I was quickly able to realise that whilst there were things that were in my control, there were things that certainly were not. And in order to kind of tackle some of the other things around the gambling harms, I needed to be in peak health as well. Otherwise, it was going to take us all down. And the sad thing through that period was the gambling activity was still happening. It didn't just.
Yeah, I mean, I can really buy into what you're saying there. One of the things I've learned over the years when we're working with people that are affected by gambling, people like yourself, is people like yourself or whoever it is that's affected by someone else's gambling, they need to stay strong and they can't break whilst it's all being sorted. You know, you've really got to keep everything together. You're talking about a family, which I'm sure it impacted on the kids, it impacted on you, impacted on people around you. You have to stay strong to sort everything out. It's only after and if the gambler ever gets sorted that you get some time to, you know, to totally for yourself. But a lot of your time, I'm sure, was spent keeping everything together, and especially the kids.
Yeah, and I always really talk about one of the things, you know, gamblers in recovery will speak as they're moving forward about the reflections around the time they lost. It steals time from everybody. The thing from that period for me, the very early doors, is, as you say, my children were very small. You know, I was just going back to work for myself. There were things that I could have been invested in that I completely lost sight of because this completely it consumed us. And it didn't just consume our home, like our core, it was our entire orbit. So you think both families, and I was trying to manage emotions and navigate dynamics that had really completely decimated because that lack of trust spiraled outwards, and it went through every bit of what was essentially our life together. Wow. And I even talk about how my friends were impacted, and particularly my workplace, who were fantastic, but I wasn't able to give them what I had been until that point because I was constantly distracted by something else. So then you've got a whole entire work community that's impacted through this one person's gambling. And I'm not putting that responsibility there, but I'm saying you can see
what you're describing is the absolute massive impact that this had on you, your family, and I'm sure a lot of people this will relate to, and they won't realise, people that haven't been stuck in the throes of what you've been stuck in, of how impactful it is and how major it is and how it upturns everything in your life. Just moving on a little bit, what are some of the characteristics for people to look out for if they think someone might be affected by gambling? You said you learnt a lot early from the person who was presenting the Gamanon group. You've also been in this field for a little bit now. So what would you say to somebody listening to this that doesn't want to get caught out like maybe you were, like maybe a lot of people are? What do you think they could be looking for that might give them early signs?
Yeah, and hindsight's always that wonderful thing,
Absolutely,
isn't it? So I look back on a little bit of reflection now on what I've learned, and particularly around kind of those identifying features as you speak about. There are telltale signs that I put down to different things. So there started to be a vacantness, particularly around family activity or involvement as that we had with the children as a team, I would say. I put that down at the time that we had 2 kids under 2, and as they got a bit bigger, it was just like my time was involved in the children and work. Well, obviously I had somebody that was the breadwinner almost. So those natural distractions, but I look back at them now and I think, no, there was a vacantness there. Even when he was there, he wasn't there. That was consumed by some of the gambling. We used to sit down like couples in the evening and watch telly or try and catch up with each other's day. Suddenly I would be going to bed and he wouldn't. And then be asleep before he was even coming upstairs. And I used to say, gosh, afterwards, like, that man never had an issue with his sleep. He was sleeping soundly, but actually some of that anxiety started probably playing out in different ways. I didn't notice because he worked at home quite a lot, that I hadn't seen post in the house for months and months. They just didn't, but things were going digitally. But now when you look at it, you think, why on earth was I not seeing these things? Some of the changing conversations, as I say, those distractions that they don't have an outward physical appearance. We know gambling is very, very hidden, and and as that manifestation of the addiction grows, those kind of behaviours go even more underground. But I suppose if I'd have had a little bit more awareness and maybe taken a little bit more investment around some of that, for my own
Nicola,
well-being as well.
that's a sort of statement I've heard quite a lot over the years, and it tends to go hand in hand, doesn't it? That the person that's affected by somebody else's gambling often beats themselves up or berates themselves for not spotting it. But we all know, and you know even more now, how hidden and how clever gamblers are. And it's only when it's come out you can go, oh, I only feel I've seen this. But they spend a lifetime perfecting them deceitful skills to keep it hidden so they can carry on doing it. But I'm sure, as you well know now, you're not alone with berating yourself and beating yourself up, because you then probably think, well, if I'd have noticed earlier, this would have happened, that would have happened. So it sounds like that happened to you as well, yeah?
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's a very, very natural conversation, and we can beat ourselves up about it. And one, it was, the early doors, that was a big shame for me as well, because I used to think, gosh, this person's my husband, but he's my best friend.
Yeah.
Like, we know each other inside out. Like, if there's someone I trust in this world, it's him. But what kind of a person am I that I didn't spot that he was having all these issues, and like, what does that say about me and the way I, was I so consumed in myself, and I did beat, I think that's the right way of saying it, I beat myself up for too long, that I could have done something differently, whereas actually the point I needed to do something differently is when I did have the understanding. I couldn't stand still in it. If I wanted something different to change in our kind of dynamic and the circumstances we were in, it wasn't just on him to go and get help and support. It was on me as well. One, through the learning. Secondly, to kind of stand up and tackle some of what I felt were the abuses within the system itself. So, like going to my bank and finding out there was absolutely zero support there. Other local services, my CAB, for example, was not exactly well equipped when I turned up at their doorstep asking what support they had for gambling harms. They almost looked at me as if I was making stuff up. I was treated as if I'd somehow been complicit in this gambling activity. And
it also sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is people's ignorance. They just didn't understand. And hopefully we've moved on a lot from now. But this is a perfect intro into the next question, what you've been talking about. With what you've been through, with your own experience, if a person is affected by someone else's gambling, how would you suggest that they approach this now?
Support for yourself. Do step forward for support yourself. The idea that you can take this on by yourself, it's too big. It gets big very, very quickly. And what I've seen in conversations with others is, because I was there myself, it's like, you do want to close it down. This is somebody else. You're not going to go out telling everybody, wanting to open up to the world, that you're having an experience in these issues. We live in this world, obviously, that we present on social media now, don't we? And, no one really wants to talk about sometimes what's going on behind closed doors. The problem with this is that because of that ripple effect in every aspect of your life, the idea that you can shoulder the burden, not only for yourself, but a loved one, it can really bring you down. And I say it took me emotionally, it took me physically, it took me mentally. And it was only at that real sort of rock bottom for me, I was just like, this isn't an existence anymore. My health is my wealth as well. And I've got to do all the things that I still want to achieve and move forward. There is a life beyond this, but it was accessing, services like yours, obviously within the National Gambling Support Network, that one gave me like a bit of grounding. It just gave me a space to talk. It gave me a means of communicating, but it gave me a sense of learning that was not only going to help me, it was going to set a pathway then for how I had those conversations elsewhere where I needed to have them.
I suppose one of the fortunate things, if fortunate's the right word to use, is at least the kids were very young when it all started to happen. So I'm sure it's, the impact could have been far greater had they been a bit older. So, thank God for small mercies. But from listening to what you're saying, and being very honest in your own appraisal, very honest in what you think you did, what you didn't do, what you could have done, what should have been done. But I'm very much aware now of how you've moved on and the massive difference you make to people working for Beacon as part of the National Gambling Support Network. So why? What made you get to working in the gambling industry, and where did you find Beacon, and how did all that happen, Nicola?
Yeah, so I've always said I think it was a set of weird circumstances in a sense, but when I started working through, as I say, that web practically, there was a couple of things that stood out to me very early doors. The financial institutions were not fit for purpose when it came to supporting people. Really, I was financially decimated myself in many ways, which your financial security is closely tied to your emotional security. And without that, I felt like a bit of a sense of injustice around that. I also was in a very fortunate place that on both sides, I had very, very strong family units. And where they needed to step up, they really did and step in to help. My questions started to form. I was like, I can't be the only person that's in this situation. I was calling up one of the TV providers or the broadband providers and saying, look, I'm going to need to renegotiate this bill or this payment because, at the moment we're having to reassess everything. And they wouldn't speak to me. They were taking the money out of my account, but they wouldn't speak to me because my name wasn't on it. So GDPR had this absolutely, really negative impact on what I was trying to do in that time. And I was like, well, what's happening to all these other people that maybe don't have that support behind them? Yeah. Where are they going? So I started, it was very basic. It was writing to my local authority because I felt that they could have done more. I wrote to the MP to make this. I was just like, I need to take this to the top. I was trying to challenge things through the financial ombudsman. And again, if I talk about the time that all took, because that was all in my time.
Yeah.
And it was more through that really. And I just thought there's got to be a better way. There's got to be more. Yeah. Certainly from an education perspective, but there's certainly got to be more on a system level that's ready and fit for purpose when people are coming to them and saying this, because this is going to impact me for years, and I knew it was going to impact me for years and years and years. And I had, as you say, I had two small children. I didn't have the luxury of time to know how we were going to rehouse ourselves, or if I was going to fall into a local system, I was going to then be an economic burden on the system. So that's where I kind of stepped up, and kind of the voluntary, the band of like lived experience was still in its kind of infancy, still even then to what it is now. Yeah. But what I did find is that I was talking to all these gamblers in recovery, but I was still talking to very few family members. Yeah. But it was when I started talking in those spaces with the gamblers in recovery, they were like, you've got a point. I've never looked at it from that perspective. Oh.
And where did you find Beacon from, and Neil and the gang?
It was just another set of strange circumstances. I was kind of working, like I say, in a lived experience voluntary capacity through the local Gamenon, raising things on a very local level. And Neil Platt, the clinical director at Beacon, was speaking at a conference at the University of Central Lancashire, which is in Preston. Yeah. And it was from there that we kind of had more of a chat. And I think it struck a chord with him, the conversation. Yeah. There was some, kind of research going on. And he said, this isn't talked about. And he was like, you're right, even kind of within our model of care, we obviously offer the therapy to affected others. I benefited from it. But he said some of this more practical conversation and particularly around that accountability and responsibility, because that really, really plays into this. You've got to have some of that, even for yourself, to be able to work through it. So we looked at really pulling something together that would feed into our local system work, and with the organisations we felt could be better placed should they be approached by someone affected by gambling harms, that they would have, you know, an umbrella of support ready and waiting for them.
And you know, as part of National Gambling Support Network ourselves, one thing I can assure you, it's a fantastic thing you now do. I know through our networking what a fantastic contribution you've made to the work of Beacon and how many people's lives you're really affecting in a positive way. So on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you for that. Also, thank you very much for being so open and honest in this podcast. And the last question I want to leave you with is, do you think enough is being done for affected others? And if not, tell me what you'd like to see happening.
I think it comes back to the conversations you and I and others like us invested in this space have had for quite some time. And actually, we've got to, if we're going to start treating this as a public health issue, we've got to start doing more in that regard. And the responsibility, while the investment and the passion is here from our side, it always has been, is that wider responsibility across our communities. So, you know, the things like the early screening on any access to organisation you may be working with, why gambling screening is not done at that point, because whether you're the affected other or the gambler, there's opportunities being missed to get to people sooner than the crisis and fracture point we find them when they come to surface. So the work, we're kind of shifting the cogs there, but that local system, national system, right up, you know, because people are so caught up in the policy change, but actually there's real simple structural changes
Absolutely.
that can be made now without waiting for legislation to do them, that would stop and mitigate the harms to the extremes, you know. And that was always, as I say, when you asked me about my reasoning for doing it, I never wanted another family to go through what I went through. You know,
and on that point,
ways to stop it.
That's such a great point to make, and I really hope that this podcast is spread far and wide, because you've been so honest, really heartfelt, and I've really felt that. And I think people listening to this that weren't aware of what happens to people that get affected by gambling, and that there is help and support, that hopefully people won't think twice about contacting an organisation within a National Gambling Support Network. Nicola, once again, thank you very, very much indeed. It's been a pleasure interviewing you, and thanks for all the work you do.
Oh, thanks, Ian. It's always a pleasure to talk to you too.
If you or someone you know is affected by gambling-related harm, please call us on 01273 833 722 or visit our website www.breakeven.org.uk. Alternatively, please call the National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020 133. Please ensure to like and subscribe to all our social media channels and keep this message out there. Thank you.